John Jackson, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really happy to have you here, very excited. You've had a very successful career in engineering, in business, and in the media, motivational speaking, et cetera, et cetera. Before we get into that, let's take a step back, if you don't mind, and look at the foundation on which all of that's been built. What can you tell us about your own early origins?
Yeah, I tell you, it all starts with my parents, my mother and my father. They were very ardent in terms of supporting me, but also education. But one of the things and major lessons was respect of every individual, race, color, creed, socioeconomic status, regardless of what that was, you have to treat people right. And that's where it started. But after they poured that into me, then it was about expanding your universe, learning all that you can, learning how to work with people, and really to be a connector. And so that's the foundation. My faith is a major cornerstone of who I am and what I do. And again, they poured that into me, and it's been a part of my life from the earliest days of my existence.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, where did you grow up? Where did all of this happen?
I consider Memphis home. Memphis is, I spent a lot of the formative years and where I grew up. So a lot of great memories, and my grandparents are buried here. So that's it.
Are you in Memphis right now?
I'm outside of Memphis, probably about 30 miles outside of Memphis in one of the suburbs. So,
all right. And what else can you tell us about your family? Maybe, were your parents working people? What kind of neighborhood did you grow up in, and so on?
Yeah, it was a very close-knit neighborhood. We weren't wealthy. Everybody worked hard. My dad worked hard. He was in labor relations and worked with a lot of different companies and those kind of things. My mom, she took care of us. I tell her today, my mom, my father passed away about 14 years ago. But my mom, she is, in her 90s, and she is doing really well. She had an accident, broke her hip a couple of months ago, gave us a scare. She's recuperating, but still giving those sage nuggets of advice and wisdom. And she has, from the day that I could understand her, the vibration of her voice, she continues to do that.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Wonderful. What was your childhood like?
It was a great childhood. It was about love and family. Family was first. We were also all very close. My parents, my maternal grandmother lived with us, and she's another one that poured into my life. Her wisdom, her knowledge, the things that she did. My parents not only talked about examples, they set the examples, and they showed us on a day-to-day basis of how to work with people, how to respect people, but also how to care. Really just the human aspect of it. And, family was really close. We, if you think about the traditional, dinners and those kind of things, it wasn't exactly like that, but there was this embodiment of family, your faith, your family, and sticking together and always loving each other and doing everything you can to help each other, and then fan that out and share it with the rest of the world.
Yeah. And what was school like for you? Primary school, secondary school?
Yeah, primary school was it was a learning experience. I was fortunate and blessed to pick up things and pick up subjects very fast. But it was one of those things where my mom and my dad were talking to me and teaching me things at the age of 5. I mean, we were discussing things, and I didn't understand all of it. But as I talk about in my book, I was a why kid. I always asked why and why. And they actually talked to me. I've said this on other shows. My dad talked to me as if I was 30 years old. And I'm like, I'm a 5-year-old kid. But he would break down the facts, and my mother would smooth the edges and give me the human side of it. But he was very emphatic about things in the world. Men have landed on the moon. That's going to open up opportunities. You need to think about your career. And again, I'm 5 and 6 years old. I can remember to this day sitting at the foot of his recliner with the toy truck. And he would just throw out these nuggets. And I'm like, okay, so why is that? And why is that? So they put me on a path of learning because they felt that it was very important. And, primary school, secondary school, that had always been a passion. And I knew that whatever I did, I better get that part right because they wouldn't tolerate anything less.
Uh-huh. Well, it's no wonder that you've been as successful as you have, because it's clear that you had a really solid foundation, good,
Yeah.
solid family foundation, good messages, good education, that you were open to all of that too. It sounds like you were a bit
Yeah, I
of a
was very curious.
sponge.
Yeah, I was very curious and I wanted to know. And sometimes I was a bit mischievous, as my older brother and sister would say, but I was a bit mischievous, but the curiosity was there and I wouldn't let things rest. And, I was telling somebody, just as an example, I said, I would ask, why is the sky blue? And they said, well, it's blue because of this. I said, why? Well, why is that? Why is that? And they say, go look it up. Go look it up and figure it out. And then I'd come back and tell them, and the questions would continue. So it
Yeah.
was just that kind of back and forth where, yeah, I may have been a little bit mischievous, maybe been a bit over curious, but you know what? It served me well.
Yeah, I would think so. I would say so. I'm curious. I know that, and I'm leaping ahead a little bit, but I know that you went on uh, to study engineering, right?
Yes,
Electrical engineering.
I did. I did. I did. And
And
that was,
what led you in that direction? I'm curious because I originally was going to be an electrical engineer because I've been a ham radio operator, and I'm wondering,
okay.
were you in amateur radio at all?
No, it's really, I had a propensity for math and science early on. But
Uh,
the funny story, my dad, it is strange, and I write about this in the book. Early on, my dad said, you know what, the world's changing. You ought to be an attorney or an engineer. I was like, okay, what are you talking about? Train engineer? What engineer? And he's like, no, an engineer that does this, this, and this. And
yeah,
he never mentioned those things to me again. And so be it, as life goes. You go on and then you end up, and sure enough, that's where my vocation led me. And it was just a curiosity for me, just realizing, his comments about where the world was going and becoming digital. And he saw some of it, but actually, Dave, he would think about electronics and where things are heading and what the future would look like. And if he were here today, he'd probably be like, yeah, I told you so. And so that piqued my curiosity. And then I
yeah.
always knew that with a foundation there, still business and just curiosities about other things, I felt that I couldn't go wrong with that. So that's how I ended up there.
What messages did you receive about race growing up? Your book is about race, and so we should begin to get into that a bit. What messages did you receive
Well, I
coming
think
up?
one of again, that foundational piece was respect everyone, regardless of their race, creed, color, socioeconomic status, background, gender. They were fervent in that message. But then the reality part of it was, now we're preparing you to go into a world where everybody doesn't see it that way. So
Uh-huh.
what you got to do is be prepared, because there, as my mother would say, there will be people that don't like you just at the look of you, how you look, how you talk, where you come from, just in a split second. So what you got to do is be able to persevere, be able to understand how to prepare yourself and equip yourself to sustain. And so those are the kind of lessons that they started to explain to me. They gave me, here's the possibilities, the art of the possible. But now let me give you some realities that you have to face, so that it's not a Pollyannish kind of world and you think everything is just a
Yeah.
bowl of gravy. And so as they talked about those things, they explained them very, very soundly, very, very logically, and gave examples. And I talk about in the book, even when I got my license, they gave me a very, very serious talk about how to respond stopped on a traffic stop, but beyond the normal things of don't drive drunk, drive at the right speed limit. After we got beyond all of that, they got into a little bit more specific and customized talk for me. And I think those things help me not have a completely negative view of the world, but have the art of the possible view. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can accomplish. And they always wanted me to be a connector, but they said you still have to be cognizant of how other people may think in the situations you face. And that helped prepare me.
Yeah. Did they give you any special messages about police? You got your license, you figure you're going to get pulled over at some point.
Yeah, they
Things were maybe not as lively then as they are now, or they were, but they were undercover. What kind of messages did they give you, if any?
Yeah, before I drove, I talk about it in the book a little bit. I was so excited, and just the exuberance when the day I got my license, I
Of
still
course.
remember it today. It's so palpable. I could feel it. And I was like, can I drive home? I want to drive home. And my
Oh,
dad was
wow.
like, no, we have to have a talk. So when I got home, I got the proverbial, you know, never have more than two people in the car, drive, be home on time. And then it got more serious. And I said, what we're about to tell you is very serious. If there is a traffic stop or you're stopped by the police, we want you to be prepared, because in some instances, interactions with Black men, boys with the police don't turn out well. And I remember telling my father, I says, hey, I'm 16. And I know he snapped at me, and he didn't snap. My father never, he snapped. He says, the world sees you as a man, regardless if you're 16. And that's when they got into the deal about, in the book, I call it the talk, hands on the steering wheel, all these specifics about turning the radio down, being respectful, saying the right things, no sudden moves, slow the car down, let the windows down, make it very obvious that there's no threat. And they went into, when you read the book, they went into a deep litany of things that actually, after they finished, my excitement for driving had kind of dampened a little bit, because it's
I
like,
can
wow,
imagine.
that's a pretty heavy conversation.
Yeah, wow. So at some point, I'm sure at some point, do you remember your first confrontation with some kind of racial prejudice? I'm sure you wouldn't forget that. What's the first jarring experience that you had?
Yeah, I think one of the things I experienced is you walk into a store, and it's a nice mall or store, what have you, and you're inquisitive about certain things. You may want to ask a question as a teenager, I remember, and you're wanting to ask a question about something, nothing harmful intended, and to get snubbed. I think that's the deal. To get snubbed as if you're unworthy or not worth the time. And you're like, I just want to ask a question, but to be overlooked or to be actually castigated with the eyes and with the being ignored as people walk past you as if you're not there. And I think that's one of the things that I talk about in the book, is the folks who are unseen, unheard, marginalized individuals, because people just ignore them. And I remember that pretty distinctly, walking into a store and wanting to look at a suit. And like, I wasn't shabbily dressed or anything. I just had, it's the summertime, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask a question. And I do remember when the person actually did talk to me, he says, well, that's pretty expensive. And, it was a very, I guess the best way to describe it is, it dampened my spirit, because it's like, where'd that come from? I was just curiously asking about something, and I just noticed that just seemed off, because I watched the behaviors towards the other people, and I noticed it
Yeah.
was different.
Yeah. And you got sort of an underlying message. Well, you're not going to be able to afford this. You're not going to be able to afford a nice suit like this.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, why are you asking about it? So I
Yeah.
understood it.
Yeah. Um, you referred to your book a few times here, and so I probably should get that out there. You've got a book called What About Me? Walking the Tightrope as a Black Man in America. And I'm curious about a very minor thing. I expect a question mark after What About Me? But there, and you made a film of the same title, but neither one has a question mark.
Right.
Have you thought about that? Was there some purposelessness behind that
Yeah, it was intentional to be a statement,
statement?
and it
Yeah.
was like a statement. And I thought, I said, that'll be interesting, because I know my old grammar school teachers or folks like that, if they're still around, they said, hey, there's supposed to be a question mark after it. And even the publisher with that says, no, I want to make it a statement as
Right.
opposed to a question. And then hopefully that will create more conversation,
Yeah.
because what I was hoping it would be is that if you're standing in the space, this ethos, and you would say, what about me? And it's really like, what about me? And not so much a question, but a statement. Because
Right.
in some cases, I feel that people just don't focus, or they are oblivious to the experiences of, people who look like me, or anybody, if they're women, if they're any marginalized group, or anybody who feels like they've been left out or unheard. And my point was, let me make a statement and see if that shocks enough people to say, what is he talking about?
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that to have it make sense to me, I had to kind of um, hear it in my head with some assertiveness, like like a challenge, Hey,
Right,
what about me?
right, right, right. And
And
we played around with exclamation points. I said, no, I want it to be a kind of a subtle thing for people to think. And even if they put themselves in the position, whatever their vantage point is, they can start to see, well, this is what the person is trying to get out or trying to make a statement about, or at least trying to have a conversation. And that's what
yeah,
I wanted the book to create, conversation.
well, lead us up to the book, if you will, as much as you want in terms of career and the progression, but then concretely, well, when did you get this tickle to write a book in your mind, and
Sure. I've had been very fortunate and blessed to have a great career and still ongoing, doing some things, working with great people. But there's a part of me that's always been there that I wanted to write about what my parents poured into me and how what they poured into me has affected and continues to affect the world on a larger scale. And when my dad passed away about 14 years ago, I said, wow, I've got notes and things that I've been keeping. I've kept notebooks, Dave, since I was a little kid, like 10 years old. I'd write little things on notebook paper and keep them. And they survived over the years, but I started to
great.
try to capture and codify that stuff. And then when my mom, as she got older, I said, listen, I want to make sure the world sees her and hears what my mom and dad poured into me. And then I want to give back on a larger scale. So it was really this recognition that it's not all about what I've done or accomplished. It's about how can I help others? And that's when I wanted to do something broader than just my career. I said, there are other dimensions to me, and it's just been a burning passion into me to share with others and to see how I could help using my voice to either be a connector, to educate. With the book, I wanted to educate, encourage, and inspire. And the same thing with the film. But I said, I've got to do these things, and I can do it in parallel. I can do this. This is my purpose. And so that's how I got there. But the book, probably been writing on it at least 4 or 5 years seriously. But I have been keeping notes almost since I was 10 years old about things that were just poignant in my past and things that I remembered, and just capturing those and say, I should tell somebody about this as an example.
Yeah.
And I've been a public speaker since I was 6, and just different things and remembering the people who poured into me. So as I grew older and different examples, I would start to use those examples and keep notes. And there was a lady 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago, I was making a speech, and about 3.5 years ago, and I was making a speech, and I was trying to get out of the back way to get down the elevator on the back stairs to get to my car to leave for another appointment. And there was this lady standing there with tears in her eyes. And she said, I started not to come, but what you said today changed my life. You need to write this down, write these things down. And that's when I locked it in, and I went forward and say, by hook or crook, I have a very busy schedule, but I'm going to write this thing down. And I can't tell it all in one book. My editor and publisher was like, save some for the next book. But I tried to get it into a fashion that was absorbable, an easy read, straightforward and simple. This is not some effort that's trying to be an educational PhD kind of thing. This is straightforward. Right. So a person 8 can understand it as well as a person who's 90.
So making a film, that's kind of a big deal. That generally involves coordinating a ton of different people and bringing all sorts of skills to bear. How did that evolve? What made you think you could do it, first of all? It doesn't sound like you suffered from self-doubt a lot in your life. But
well, when I knew that I wanted to give back, I had the book, and that was in my brain, and I was thinking about that. But to show you how things work in life, and I write about this too, the connectivities in the universe that link us together.
Yeah.
I was making a speech in Los Angeles and met one of my good friend Taru Brooks, who's the executive producer on the film, and Earl Pitts. But when Taru and I were talking in Los Angeles, I said, listen, I want to give back. I got this book. And he was like, well, how about a documentary? And I said, yeah, that would be good to do. And he said, well, wait a minute. The documentary and the book go together. They can both, push the message. And we talked about it. And I said, let me think about it. And we went back and forth. And I said, listen, let's go for it. Let's do it. And then when that was decided upon, we started to frame it up. And I says, I'm all in. And, we funded the thing and did what we had to do and made it happen. And I think that was an exciting part because, again, that started to expand my wings into broader areas. The book is a different ththing. That's not in my traditional trajectory of vocation. It's been in my spirit. But then the documentary film adds to it. And it's just opened up, I informed my company, 5J Entertainment. I said, I can use this as a vehicle to do exactly what I wanted to do, is to share with more people, bring more people together, create understanding, and get those marginalized voices out there, but really to bring people together and understand.
What's 5J? J could be John Jackson. You got two J's there. What's the 5J?
5J, it's my family. It's my family. That's what the 5J stands for. Yeah.
All
That's
right.
what it stands for.
Okay. And so, I was very happy to discover that the film was available on Amazon Prime. And so I was able to watch it. And I was very impressed. It's a very sober offering and without being preachy at all. It's been a while since I watched it because I watched it back when I first began to think about doing this interview. But it features a number of men speaking about their experience. You set it up to give people a sense of what they'll encounter in this film.
Yeah, the film, What About Me, is really allowing Black men to speak to their voice and their experiences. And we've got individuals who are actors and stars in Hollywood. We've got college students. We've got attorneys. And it's amazing that the world kind of puts a monolithic label on Black men. They're either entertainments, athletes, or criminals. And so we want to say, no, they're fathers, they're good fathers, they're husbands, they're artists. They have feelings, they have passions, they have things that are just like anybody else. But what we wanted to do is show that in spite of those differences, we do have those common themes or things that we've experienced that create a little bit of a different experience for us in a path that we have to walk.
That message really comes through again without any preachiness. There's I don't recall any kind of narration saying a lot about who these people were or anything like that. But what you get is, just as you say, there's this kind of monolithic view that people tend to have, or that society gives us, as you say, entertainer, sports figure, or criminal. And those are the options. And what you see is a very textured, or what you experience is a very textured experience of some real individuals who are all different from each other.
Right. And that's what we shot for. Again, I give credit, my co-executive producers, as we talked about, and we talked about the makeup. We wanted people to see the different sides of the individuals. We have an individual that was wrongly incarcerated, and his story is just, if that doesn't rip your heart in half, I don't know what will. But when you hear his story, but then you hear the aspirations of a young college student, and you hear the things that other people have experienced, and you pull that together, it gives you this collage of interesting encounters that makes you think. And again, with the documentary, I wanted to create conversation, and that conversation would be a catalyst for other things of how do we get better? How do we bring people together? How do they understand? And how do we start to get empathy and create those allies and people coming together, recognizing how do we make this world a better place? But you got to understand the facts and get your grounding on what's actually occurring.
Yeah. So we've gone through a period right now of really heated up, in your face divisions in this society. Very upsetting, it's we're at a scary place, but in some ways, I think a very encouraging place from a certain point of view, with the way that activists have really come forward very clearly through marches, etc., to say this is intolerable, and this has been going on a long time. And most white people, I think, had no sense of how pervasive the issues were between the Black community and police departments. And so, I think, there's so much wonderful literature now coming out, being produced by Black people. I was listening to an interview recently on Fresh Air, the
Terry
PBS, Terry Gross, who's one of my interview heroes. If I could model myself on an interviewer, it would be her. And she was, I don't remember the author's name, but a Black woman historian who's written a book about the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment, which is this big deal now, our right to bear arms.
Right.
And I'd never heard this before, but she said the whole thing about militias and the right to bear arms was so that slaveholders could keep the slaves down. They were worried about slave revolts, and there were slave revolts that happened. And the militias would go out and round people up and bring them back or kill them or whatever. And so this whole thing about our right to bear arms certainly wasn't the right to bear machine guns and bazookas and things like that. But it was a right for white landed gentry to bear arms.
Correct.
Or have other people in their employ bear arms. Put me in mind of the Black Panthers and how shocking it was, the images of these Black Beret guys on each side of Huey Newton or whoever it was with rifles. And that was scary.
Right.
Whoa, but I think about it now and I think, well, wait a second. If white people can have guns, why can't Black people have guns? And of course they do. A lot of the criminals do. But it was a shocking image, and deliberately, to kind of confront the country with a different image. And in fact, the Black Panthers did a lot to try to do good, in their communities, and food and education. Yeah. So here we are in the situation. What are your thoughts on the current situation and what's possible and where and how it needs to go?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have talked about recently is, we have to come together, and I think understanding history and understanding the foundations of what occurred, the fact-based history, is so important. It's healing. And I was speaking to a group just yesterday about a person who goes to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to get some psychoanalysis because they've had some trauma in their lives. That doctor or that clinician goes back and talks to the person and listens, ultimately trying to get to what happened in your life. And usually it's some traumatic event. They could have been abused or some horrific event occurred, and that has impacted their lives, whatever age they are now. So it's kind of like as our history as a country, we have to go back and understand these horrific events and what's happened to certain individuals. And I think that's where the education, I talk about this in the book, the model is we've got to get people educated and an acknowledgement of these things happened and occurred. That's how you peel away the scar tissue and try to get some understanding, because before you can get healing, you got to get understanding and acknowledgement. So I really promote and propose those kind of pieces. I do know, today maybe there's some who don't want to hear much about the history of it because it is hard to bear. But I think that's a part of the healing. If you're educated about what's going on, there's understanding, there's the acknowledgement that some horrific things happened to a people, and that the things didn't just happen, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, 400. There was a systematic pattern or systemic pattern that rolls on. And you read the different books that are out there. And that's what I always ask people to go read. Don't just get one source. Don't listen to talking heads. Go do your own research and then counter that with other research so you can get some objective view. Talk to individuals of color or whomever and listen to their plight. And then you can get to this point of some empathy and allyship and some healing. Once that's done, we may not get everybody, but we'll bring the world together. But as long as everything is a polar opposite, it's on a path to some catastrophic event.
Right.
And the example that I give, Dave, is this. I said, imagine you're in the North Atlantic and you're on this boat. We're all on this one big boat. And you got one side of the boat says, I'm going to blow this end of the boat up because I don't like the folks on the other end of the boat. There's a small group of people in the middle says, oh, don't blow the boat up because we'll all go down. But there's one group that says, we're going to blow this end of the boat up. We don't care. And then there's the reality that you're in the North Atlantic. It's freezing. The water's freezing. You blow up the boat and you all go down. I said, that's a pretty dire circumstance. And so that's where everybody has to take those analogies or metaphors and pull back and say, listen, we've got to come together and figure out a way. We won't have total agreement on everything. But as Dr. King said, we've got to learn to live together as brothers, and I'm adding sisters, or we'll perish as fools. And that's where I kind of get the analogy from. One of the examples I always talk about, Dave, when I make speeches, and I've done this for years, I said, why is it in these movies in Hollywood, when there's some cataclysmic event, there's going to be a meteor or the earth's going to explode, why does everybody come together then? Everybody's all on one accord, as long as there's no anarchy. But typically the main characters, everybody gears up to try to figure out a plan. I said, unfortunately, that's what we need to do today. But unfortunately, what happens is there's so much division, and you'd hate for something cataclysmic to have to occur for folks to pull back and say, wow, let's look at this in a sensible way and come together and work together. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, for years, I've kind of said, it'd be good if we did get invaded from outer space, because then we'd pull together. You say, they're the enemy. Yeah. And we would get organized around that.
Yeah.
So what are you do a lot of public speaking for who, and what are is there like a single speech kind of that we're getting now, or a variety of topics?
Yeah, there are a variety of topics. I talk about, definitely the book and the documentary, and I talk about what I'm talking about now, how to bring people together, but also I do speeches on leadership, what it means in the corporate world. I talk about technology, artificial intelligence, just the consumer revolution and the technological revolution, kind of like my father talked about. Those two things have merged together and given us a world that is just blows my mind. I get excited about when I see what the possibilities are. Consumer expectation, consumer demand, and consumer psyche are just off the charts, because now you get things faster. You can do things on your phone that you could have never imagined. You can order a car in a vending machine. So I do talk about the path of how we got to these technologies, how companies need to prepare for not just this year, but 2 years out. And I do blend those things. So, and history. History is just been one of my passions. Everything from the comparatives of the Roman Empire and our United States of America, how the society, but then just history in general, because I think there's so much to learn, and there's so much when you dig deeper, when you talked about the professor who was talking about the Second Amendment, it's just amazing to learn what has occurred in world history and in our U.S. history. But one of the other things I do in history, I try to make examples to make people think or to invoke some critical thought. When I speak about racism and some different things, I tell people that history has proven to us that racism destroys countries, families, communities, what have you. And if you don't believe me, just go back and you can look at a Nazi Germany and look at what happened to that country. You can look at a Bosnia Herzegovina and Serbia. You can look at that. You can look at what happened in Rwanda, and the Hutus and the Tutsis, and even in Darfur. You can look at any place where people are hated, and you look at these things and you say, nothing good comes out of it. So I try to paint these examples so that people can learn and think about it. And even our Civil War, look at the carnage. So it's just been a passion of mine, and those subjects and things on a myriad of levels that I've studied, and they've just become a part of me. And I just try to have a conversation with individuals to say, can we think about these things a little bit differently, and can we understand?
Well, boy, I experience you as such a positive force. You've got a great smile and a great personality, and you're a good example of a call to reason. And do you have any other sorts of concrete ideas? I know there have been efforts. There are different groups that have tried to bring blacks and whites together in a multi-day discussion, let's say, to talk openly and to reveal their wounds and their fears and their projections. And Carl Rogers is somebody who I think of who used that approach with not just on the racial divide, but also trying to work with some international situations.
I think
so. Go
ahead.
Yeah,
I think it's important. One of the things that I promoted quite heavily, especially after the George Floyd murder and some other things that have gone on, I've had friends across the world. They would call and ask me, John, what about this? What I didn't understand, whether it's in Canada, even Dubai, and across the U.S., friends of all races and colors and creeds. And I said, one of the things you have to do is we've got to listen. We've got to sit down, and if there's somebody that it's not incumbent upon them to school you and give you everything. There's stuff you have to do, but listen to their plight, listen to their experiences. And if you start with the listening piece of it, what I've tried to do and talked about is, settings for common ground where you can listen, after there are listening sessions. I think those listening sessions should be so intentional, that everybody, a lot of times, Dave, what happens is people want to jump to conclusions or jump to solutions. Hey, I heard you for 15 minutes and I got a solution. And that's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
You can't solve this in 15 minutes. And you have to get into the heart and the psyche of what's been taught, what's been heard, what's been understood. Because can you imagine, if a person's grandfather and grandmother who they love dearly and parents have taught them one thing and they've been exposed to something, and now you're going to say you got to think differently about it. There has to be a really acutely thought out way of how do you bring those feelings and emotions into it. So listening helps. And then you work towards, let's have discussions about common ground. What can we agree upon? Because sometimes those things become antagonistic and it becomes a back and forth, and that doesn't really help.
Right.
But I think you have to, there's certain things that have to be acknowledged. And, one colleague or one friend was telling me that, we tried to do this and we were explaining some of the historical things that are fact-based. And the person said, no, that's not right. That's not right. That never happened. That's distorted. When that happens, you got to take another tact. You got to go get objective fact. And I know in the day's time, sometimes fact is not fact is not fact. But I explained to them, and I'll use this example with you. I said, let's take a problem. And if you have a calculus problem, physics, engineering, algebra, geometry, very complex math problem, there are certain facts that you have to have. We all know that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, except in Antarctica, maybe some little It boils at 212. Pi is 3.14. All these facts that have been established. Gravity is this and whatever. And people take those and plug those into those difficult equations. And it may take 5 or 6 people, but they have understanding of facts. And they work on these really hard problems. They may be scientists or engineers or what have you, chemists. And they solve these really, really hard problems as doctors. And they come to a solution and it works. I said, same thing with the issues that we face today with race and these type of things and any other type of issues of discrimination or racism. It's a very, very hard problem. And so you have to start with inputting the facts that are legitimate facts. And then you can work to dissolve or really work to resolve that hard problem. And I think that's why I rely heavily on, the education piece and the fact base and getting everybody there. Because can you imagine if a group of people were working on this really tough chemistry problem and half of the room thought water freezes at 15 degrees Fahrenheit, half the room thinks it's 32 degrees, the other half thinks water doesn't freeze. Can you see how hard that problem would be to solve? So I use that as a kind of an analogy to help people understand why it's so important to have facts.
Sure. Do you have a sense of what your next book's going to be or your next film? Or you may not want to let it out of the bottle yet.
I've got a few ideas. I've had some input. I really want, this book to get into as many hands as possible to start this conversation. I've had great feedback really from different places around the world and in the US. And if people could read it and understand, the book is about my life, but it shows how it plays into the broader picture. The documentary is about, a group of people, this subset, Black men and what they go through. And that's why I titled them the same thing. But what I'd hope to do is get that message out. And then I want to come back. I've got a couple of ideas for a couple of books and I got an idea for a new film, but still trying to get the right cadence in my head and to figure out what's going to be the most effective and the most efficient. So things that are passions of my heart, I think they work best because as you listen to me today, I'm speaking from my heart. I mean, this is not scripted. It's what I believe with all my fiber. And I want to make sure I pour that into the world.
That would be a good place for us to wrap it up. I think that's a good closing message.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Do you, anything more you want to say?
No, I think that's it. Again, trying to give back and educate, encourage and inspire and really pour into the world, through my writings, through my documentary. It's important. It's important to me. It's incumbent upon me. I feel it's a purpose. And I feel that it's my purpose to reach out to as many people, wherever they are, whomever they are, what they look like. And let's have these discussions. But then, there are broader things as I talked about. You asked me about the different speeches. I think there are other elements and other connectedness, connected ideas that go into it. Our country, our future. These things are so important. Many layers.
Yeah. Do you have any political ambitions? I think at some point people are going to approach you and say, hey, you ought to run for this or that.
No, I'm a kind of a behind the scenes guy. I think, I'm just a practitioner. I try to create ideas and be a strategist and, communicate it as simply as I can to whether it's one person or 10,000 people, communicate the message and to create a spark. Yeah. If I can create a spark and create some critical thinking and invoke some thought, I think that helps change the world one little bit at a time. And
well, you keep doing that. I think you're doing a great job. I like the way that you said you're waiting for that cadence to come, because I really feel that you did that in the first film.
Right.
Because it wasn't preachy. It had just the right cadence, I think, to have the impact that you wanted. And so trust that process, your process, and keep on keeping on.
I will do.
Okay.
Thanks so much for having me. And, Dave, I'll say, you can get the book on Amazon. The book is on Amazon and the documentary is on Amazon Prime Video. It's streaming now. And just thanks for your support, and thanks for your listener support. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Okay. John Jackson, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.